Today we're going to talk about a scientist whose discovery literally changed the course of history, unlocking the power of the atom. But for decades, her name was almost completely written out of the story. We're talking about the incredible Lise Meitner.
So get this, Lise Meitner was the physicist who figured out nuclear fission, the science behind both nuclear power and the atomic bomb. But when the Nobel Prize was handed out for that exact discovery in 1944, her name was nowhere on the ticket. So how on earth does that happen? Well, let's get into it.
To really understand her story, you have to picture the world she was trying to break into. It was a world that was absolutely not ready for a woman with her kind of ambition and, frankly, her genius. The obstacles were just enormous, and the stakes couldn't have been higher.
And when I say high stakes, I don't just mean for her career. As a scientist of Jewish heritage working in Germany in the 1930s, her work and her life were in constant jeopardy. This quote right here comes from the moment she had to flee for her life in 1938. Everything was on the line. I mean, just look at what she had to go through simply to get her foot in the door. When she first got to Berlin, women weren't even officially allowed into Prussian universities. She was literally forbidden from setting foot in the main institute where her own research partner worked, so she was stuck in a basement woodshop. Oh, and she worked for free for years. There's even this one story where an encyclopedia editor, totally impressed by her work, writes a letter to Herr Meitner, Mr. Meitner. The second he found out she was a woman, poof, the offer was gone.
But even with all that working against her, her talent was just too bright to ignore, and it led to one of the most important scientific partnerships of the 20th century.
For 3 decades, Lise Meitner and a chemist named Otto Hahn were this dynamic duo. Their partnership was, really, the perfect combination of skills. Hahn was the master in the lab, doing the experiments, separating the substances. But Meitner, she was the theoretical physicist who could look at his data and figure out what it all meant. One couldn't succeed without the other. They were a team.
And they were seriously good at what they did. Way before the whole fission thing, they were already heavyweights in the field of radioactivity. They even co-discovered an element, protactinium, way back in 1917. So, these two were the real deal.
But this incredible, world-class partnership was on a collision course with the brutal politics of Nazi Germany, and it would force one of the biggest discoveries of the century to be made from hundreds of miles away.
The chain of events here is just breathtaking. In March of '38, Germany annexes Austria. And just like that, Meitner's Austrian citizenship is worthless. By July, her own partner, Otto Hahn, is telling her it's not safe, that she has to leave. She escapes to Sweden with basically nothing. But then, just a few months later, in December, she gets a letter from Hahn. He's totally confused. He bombarded uranium with neutrons and found barium, an element that's way, way lighter. He had no idea what was going on, but she did.
And this is the moment. It's Christmas, she's in exile in Sweden, walking in the snow with her nephew, who's also a physicist. She sits down to think through Hahn's bizarre results, and it hits her. This absolutely stunning realization: the uranium atom wasn't just getting a small piece knocked off. No, it was splitting right in half. Right away, she and her nephew started crunching the numbers. They realized this process would release a tremendous amount of energy, and they even used Einstein's famous equation, E=mc², to figure out how much. They even came up with a name for it. They borrowed a term from biology, cell division, and called it nuclear fission. She had solved the entire puzzle.
So the discovery was made. The physics was revolutionary, but the human part of the story, the part about who gets the credit, was just getting started. And well, it was about to get very, very messy.
See, when Otto Hahn published his experimental findings, he published them alone. Back in Nazi Germany, putting the name of a Jewish woman who had fled the regime on his paper would have been incredibly dangerous for him. So he didn't. He published without her, and in doing so, he basically erased her from her own discovery.
So, fast forward a few years. The world is at war. A war that will be ended by a weapon made possible by her discovery. And in 1944, the Nobel Committee gathers to decide who should get the prize for this incredible breakthrough. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the discovery of nuclear fission went to Otto Hahn. And only Otto Hahn. Lise Meitner, the person who actually understood the physics, explained the process, and even named it, was left out completely.
But this right here tells you everything you need to know about her character. During the war, the Allies invited her to come work on the Manhattan Project to help build an atomic bomb. She said no, flat out refused. Her exact words were, "I will have nothing to do with a bomb."
Even as her own work was being turned into a weapon, she stayed true to her principle.
So yeah, she was denied the Nobel. But history has a funny way of correcting the record, and Lise Meitner would eventually get an honor that you could argue is even more profound.
Because think about it, a Nobel Prize is an award given in a single moment. But to have your name woven into the very fabric of the universe, well, that's forever.
And in 1997, decades later, the scientific world did just that. They officially named element 109 on the periodic table Meitnerium, symbol MT, in her honor. It's a permanent recognition that can never be overlooked or taken away.
And you have to understand just how special this is. For example, curium is named after both Marie and Pierre Curie, but Meitnerium is named for Lise alone. She is the only real-life woman to have an element named singularly and specifically for her.
In the end, it all comes down to this simple, powerful phrase that's engraved on her tombstone. Forget the prizes, forget the politics. Her true legacy is that she was a brilliant mind who never, ever lost her humanity.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. Here we have a scientist who chose her conscience over working on weapons, who chose humanity over fame. It really makes you ask the question, in a world that often celebrates the exact opposite, how should we be remembering our real heroes?